After Pakistan, Bangladesh, Iran, and Cambodia, Venezuela became the latest victim of Chinese toys. Before dawn broke over Caracas, over 150 U.S. aircraft approached Venezuelan airspace in Operation Absolute Resolve. And Venezuela's Chinese stealth aircraft hunters should have detected them. Instead, radar screens were overwhelmed by electronic warfare and destroyed by anti-radiation missiles. The Chinese radar failed to detect a single U.S. aircraft. Within 3 hours, President Maduro was captured, and that stripped Chinese weapons naked in front of the world once again. When it comes to numbers, China looks nothing less than Thanos. One move and it could wipe out countries in a jiffy. 600 nuclear warheads, the world's largest navy, the third largest air force, and the highest number of tanks. For decades, this became one of the 3 reasons most countries were attracted to this glitter. But after watching others get burned, countries that were once fans of Chinese weapons are quietly moving away from them. Data confirms it. China's arms exports dropped by 23% compared to the 2013-2017 period, with 2018 to 2022. While China was exporting fewer weapons, the United States and France were expanding and capturing new markets. But that's not worth celebrating, because despite the hit, China has somehow cracked the art of selling its Legos packaged as weapons like no one else ever did. Oh, sorry, you know what? Actually, Legos are much more reliable. Okay, so the first reason is a no-brainer. China air defense costs around $200 million per battery, whereas US Patriot missiles cost around $1 billion per battery. Across nearly every weapons category, the cost is almost half of the price of its Western counterparts. So a country struggling to feed its people, well, it's a no-brainer. They know it's not the best choice, but it's the only one they can afford. But they also played a masterstroke to make it 10 times more appealing. For example, it worked so well that China became Bangladesh's largest arms supplier. That magic is flexible financing. In simple terms, this meant long-term loans and low-interest credit from Chinese state banks, allowing poorer countries to buy weapons without large upfront payments. Bangladesh, for example, used Chinese financing to acquire submarines and surface warships. This was a game changer, because most Western countries don't offer anything like flexible financing. But China's lethal combination of cheap weapons and flexible financing made it a hero amongst developing countries. But despite all the glitter, something kept these countries hesitating before buying these weapons. The events that were confirming their doubts every passing day. I don't mean the events that almost no one noticed, but the ones that were the final nail in the coffin. The unnoticed failures obviously existed, like in 2020, when Bangladesh abandoned Chinese-built frigates effectively along riverbanks, or when Myanmar grounded 11 of the 16 Chinese aircraft. The list could take a separate video to the end, but the Chinese weapons simply became unreliable. Some of them malfunctioned, while others broke down because of inferior material. Only a few were noticing them, mostly the defense experts or military enthusiasts. But 2025 became the year when everyone noticed their weapons, but for all the wrong reasons. Not one expose, but 3 in the same year. In May of 2025, when Indian drones and missiles were cruising towards Pakistani terror launch pads, they were supposed to be intercepted. But during Operation Sindoor, their Chinese air defense failed to coordinate responses. Batteries operated in isolation. Communication links collapsed under electronic warfare pressure. And Indian strikes were able to neutralize individual components without facing massive defensive fire. In fact, when a Pakistani jet fired a Chinese air-to-air missile, it didn't even explode, and was later found fully intact in India. Months later, the US and Israel rained havoc on Iran. Their Chinese equipment failed to detect stealth fighter jets, which left Iranian missile crews completely blind. Then it was Cambodia's turn. When Cambodia and Thailand clashed, Cambodia's Chinese-made air defense system failed to intercept Thai F-16 and Gripen aircraft. Also, gaps in radar systems and broken system integration left them useless in real combat. But what is the fundamental reason behind the malfunctions? I mean, on the surface, we all say that this is Temu-grade weapons, Winnie the Pooh's toys, or a Lego competitor, but deep down, there's a fundamental reason, a deep problem behind the malfunctions. Who knows it better than those helpless dead scientists? On the 5th of March, 2025, Liu Yongfeng was reported to have collapsed after working far beyond legal limits. His wife later informed that for 277 days, he came back from work no earlier than 9 p.m. Liu wasn't a normal human, but a genius scientist. But the drive for breakthroughs in AI, semiconductors, and advanced materials had created a culture of chronic overwork that even top scientists struggled to withstand, and Liu became the victim of this hell. Reports show a rising number of early deaths and suicides among scientists under 60. 76 26 such cases were recorded in one recent year alone, and nothing different for the defense industry. China's defense industry is also under intense internal pressure to meet ambitious production and deployment deadlines set by political leadership. The system often prioritizes speed over thorough testing and refinement. Security analysis says that researchers and engineers across China's science and technology sectors are known to face extremely long working hours and high performance pressure, contributing to burnout and early retirements in key scientific fields. But sometimes it's not a quality problem. Many of the Chinese weapons are of decent quality and could have worked completely fine, but this damn thing called speed messed everything up. In 2026, Venezuela entered conflict with nearly half of its Chinese-supplied radars already offline due to spare parts shortage. Pakistan stripped parts from some ships to fix and keep other ships running. Bangladesh abandoned entire platforms. The reason? China lacks a global maintenance and spare parts network comparable to Western suppliers. So really, their weaknesses don't stop in the lab. In the field, they turn into logistical failures. Slow spare parts and poor after-sales support leaves Chinese weapons sitting idle, while buyers struggle to keep them operational. The core reason behind this is the mindset of speed over everything. Quality or execution didn't matter. And who knows it better than those two American aircraft carriers in the 1990s? After all, they were the ones who gave birth to China's obsession with speed. This defining moment came in 1995 through 1996. This was the time during the Taiwan Strait crisis. China attempted to intimidate Taiwan ahead of its presidential election by launching missile tests and conducting military exercises near the island. The United States responded by deploying 2 aircraft carrier battle groups directly into the Taiwan Strait. China could neither stop them nor meaningfully challenge their presence. This moment shocked Beijing's leadership. It made them realize that they were militarily powerless in their own neighborhood, and that economic growth did not translate into strategic security. From that point onward, Taiwan became the central driver of China's military planning. Chinese leaders concluded that any future conflict over Taiwan would be decided by speed and overwhelming force. If the United States intervened early, China would lose. This belief pushed planners to prioritize scale, quantity, and rapid deployment, even if quality lagged. The goal was not perfect weapons, but enough weapons to saturate defenses and delay or deter U.S. intervention. So speed became their center point, and the work began. Remember, I just said the work began. I never mentioned the honest work began. During the late 1990s and the early 2000s, China swallowed its ego and followed Deng Xiaoping's strategy of hide your strength, bide your time. Simply, it says China should stay quiet about its power, avoid confrontation, and patiently wait until it's strong enough to act. Military spending was restrained publicly, but learning accelerated quietly. But the pace they planned was simply impossible to sustain using traditional methods. The ones that include intense research and development and cost a ton of money and resources. The other way was to simply keep importing weapons until you develop yours. But China followed a dirty path. China imported large volumes of Russian equipment, including fighter jets, submarines, and air defense systems. Even equipment from other Western countries were imported. Not for the reason you think. They reverse-engineered foreign systems and laid the groundwork for a domestic defense industry capable of mass production. Seems like a hell of a lot of dirty work, but everyone's surprised it almost worked like a miracle. China knew this period was about absorption rather than dominance. China studied modern warfare. As China's economy surged after the Asian financial crisis, military spending followed. Between 1998 and 2007, China's defense budget grew at an average rate of 15.9%. Consistently faster than 12.5% GDP growth. By 2008, China officially reported defense spending of $58.76 billion, though international assessments revealed the real figure was far higher. This was the moment when China decided to convert economic power directly into military capacity. They were producing weapons at a pace the traditional path could never match. Geopolitical pressures intensified this trajectory. The US strengthened alliances across East Asia, expanding its naval presence into the Western Pacific and increasing arms sales to Taiwan. From Beijing's perspective, these actions formed a containment strategy designed to block China's rise. In response, Chinese planners shifted toward anti-access and area denial A2AD, capable missiles, submarines, air defenses, and strike aircraft, designed to push US forces away from Chinese coastlines. But the 2008 global financial crisis was the moment that reinforced China's confidence in this approach. While Western countries cut defense budgets, China continued increasing military spending at double-digit rates. Chinese leaders saw global instability as an opportunity. Weapons production supported domestic industry, stabilized employment, and strengthened China's relative power at a time when others were retrenching. The next few years saw rapid growth, but the madman that was about to come into power was about to change the entire dimension of global defense. That phase began after Xi Jinping took power in 2012. Xi placed military modernization at the core of national strategy and openly declared that the People's Liberation Army must be capable of fighting and winning modern wars. Defense industries were pushed to deliver results quickly and reinforce the bias towards speed and scale. Regional tensions added urgency. Disputes in the South China Sea escalated as China enforced territorial claims against multiple neighbors. Artificial island construction between 2014 and 2016 required sustained naval and air presence, driving demand for large fleets and extensive military coverage. At the same time, China's dependence on overseas trade and energy routes forced planners to think beyond coastal defense towards broader power projection. By 2020, the results were visible. China had built the world's largest navy by ship count, the largest tank fleet, and one of the fastest-growing missile forces on Earth. These weapons were not built primarily for export or display. They were built because Chinese leaders believed that only overwhelming numbers could compensate for decades of inferiority and prevent a repeat of past humiliations like the Taiwan Strait crisis. So, geopolitical pressure, regional disputes, and the desire to protect global trade routes pushed China towards rapid militarization. Quantity became an insurance, a way to signal resolve and reshape the regional balance of power, even if individual systems were imperfect. But this strategy carried a hidden cost. When weapons built for speed and scale were finally tested outside controlled environments, the weaknesses that had been masked by numbers began to surface. The most fundamental weakness lies in material science and metallurgy. Modern military platforms rely on advanced titanium alloys. These materials must remain strong under extreme temperatures while staying lightweight. Producing them requires atomic-level control over impurities, uniform grain structure across massive ingots, and heat-treated precision within a narrow temperature range. Western aerospace industries took more than 4 decades to master this process. China has not. This gap appeared clearly in the field. Myanmar's JF-17 fighters developed structural cracks near wing hardpoints within just 2 years of service, indicating that the alloys used could not handle cyclic flight stress. Pakistan's F-22P frigates suffered identical crankcase degradation across multiple ships, pointing to systemic material failure rather than isolated defects. Bangladesh later cited poor metallurgy across naval systems before abandoning entire vessels, costing more than $100 million each. These were not maintenance mistakes. They were foundational manufacturing flaws. Closely tied to metallurgy is China's weakness in composite materials. Modern aircraft like Boeing 787 now use composites for more than 50% of their structure. These materials demand precise carbon fiber diameter control, stable resin chemistry, and flawless curing cycles. Even minor deviations lead to delamination, moisture absorption, and thermal cracking. Western firms invested billions of dollars and decades of experimentation to perfect these processes. China can produce composites, but quality consistently remains unreliable. Field deployments in Myanmar and Bangladesh showed classic signs of composite degradation, confirming that production processes were incomplete. Perhaps the most persistent weakness is engine manufacturing. Jet engines operate at temperatures above 1500 degrees Celsius and rely on single-crystal turbine blades and microscopic thermal barrier coatings. This technology requires enormous investment and decades of institutional knowledge. China still cannot produce reliable single-crystal blades at scale. As a result, Chinese engines underperform in thrust, efficiency, and lifespan. Another major vulnerability lies in advanced semiconductors. Modern radars, missiles, and command systems depend on processors at 7-nanometer scale or smaller. China remains largely limited to 14 nanometers and faces strict import restrictions. During Venezuela's air defense collapse, Chinese radars failed under electronic warfare stress because processors could not adapt fast enough and gallium nitride components overheated. Venezuela had deployed a network centered around Chinese JY-27A radars, FK-3 missile systems, and centralized command nodes. When U.S. forces targeted individual components with electronic attacks, the entire network collapsed instead of degrading gradually. Radars failed to track targets, missile batteries lost command connectivity, and no effective fallback systems existed. The much-advertised anti-stealth radar capabilities proved ineffective against modern U.S. aircraft operating in contested electromagnetic environments. Even when individual systems functioned, China's most damaging weakness emerged in software integration and network architecture. This was visible during Pakistan's Operation Sindoor, where HQ-9 batteries operated independently instead of sharing targeting data, and in Venezuela, where the loss of a command node shut down the entire air defense network. These were architectural flaws built into the system. Corruption amplified every weakness. Inspections were bypassed, materials substituted, and test reports falsified. Quality control collapsed under pressure to meet production targets. Even inside China, investigations uncovered ballistic missiles filled with water instead of fuel, and silo lids that failed to open. These revelations shattered confidence at the highest levels. In the past few decades, even the PLA's leadership capacity has become increasingly unreliable due to corruption and foundational gaps. Organizational structure worsened these problems. The PLA remains highly centralized because political control is prioritized over battlefield autonomy. Tactical commanders cannot act independently, often waiting 5 to 30 minutes for approval, while modern combat unfolds in seconds. Similar rigidity crippled Russian forces in Ukraine, and the same pattern was evident in Venezuela's response. After years of failures, shrinking exports, and rising distrust, China is now trying to change course. By early 2026, Beijing openly acknowledged that the challenge was no longer about pricing or competition. It has become a credibility crisis. China's shrinking role became even clearer when looking at market share. Latest figures show that China's overall share of global arms exports slipped from 6.3% to 5.2%. Even in the 2019 to 2023 period, China ranked only 4th globally, with around 5.8% of total arms exports. Despite massive production capacity and aggressive marketing, China never came close to challenging Western dominance. The contrast with competitors is sharp. Between 2014 to 2018 and 2019 to 2023, U.S. arms exports grew by 17%, while Chinese exports declined by around 5.3% over the same comparison. Over a longer window, the fall is even steeper. Analysts consistently note that while Western suppliers gained ground in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, China steadily lost market share. Defense analysts linked to RAND and regional security institutes observed that demand began shrinking once poor quality, inconsistent performance, and maintenance problems became visible. By the early 2020s, warning signs were already clear. Chinese arms shipments fell 7.8% between 2016 and 2020, compared to the previous 5-year period, and the global market share slipped from 5.6% to 5.2%. Exports directly connected this decline to reliability issues and the lack of combat-proven performance. On paper, China still appears strong because most of its exports flow into one region. Around 85% of Chinese arms sales now go to Asia, Oceania, and Pakistan alone accounts for 61% of China's exports in the 2019 to 2023 period. This heavy dependence masks the real problem. Outside a small circle of core buyers, confidence is eroding fast. SIPRI and regional analysts note that many countries are now openly concerned about the lack of combat testing, lower certification standards, and weak after-sale support compared to NATO-grade systems. Several governments are quietly rethinking future Chinese purchases. The biggest shift is psychological. China is no longer viewed merely as a cheap alternative. The recent expulsion of 2 Chinese defense ministers, Li Shangfu and Wei Fenghe, has described Chinese weapons as high risk. Hidden costs, frequent malfunctions, poor integration, and unreliable spare parts supply are now widely recognized. Countries that once accepted trade-offs for lower prices are moving back towards Western or other non-Chinese suppliers. SIPRI's 2023 report showed that while total international arms sales grew by 4.2% to $632 billion, driven by the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, Chinese companies barely benefited. Chinese defense revenues rose by only 0.7%. The slowest growth since 2019. Out of the world's 100 largest defense companies, only 9 were Chinese, earning $103 billion, compared to 41 U.S. companies generating $317 billion. The combined revenue of China's major arms firms fell by 10% to $88.3 billion, the largest aggregated drop among all countries represented in the global top 100. Norinco alone recorded a 31% fall in revenue, dropping from $20.31 billion to $13.97 billion after corruption investigations, delayed or canceled contracts. Norinco is a state-owned defense company. Arms revenues declined at AVIC, the country's largest military aerospace manufacturer, and Norinco, China's primary land weapons producer, and at the missile and aerospace firm CASC. While Chinese revenues fell, Japan's arms companies increased revenues by 40%, and South Korea's by 31%. This clearly sends a signal on how buyers were shifting towards alternative suppliers even within Asia. Asia and Oceania became the only regions in the world to see an overall decline in arms revenues, driven almost entirely by Chinese losses. Numerically, the headline story is a 23% drop in export volume and a loss of about 1 percentage point in global market share. Strategically, the damage is far deeper. Real-world failures transformed China's image from a rising arms supplier into a risky bet. Jordan, Algeria, Iraq, Egypt, Iran, Sri Lanka are examples of countries that have slowed, stopped, or canceled Chinese weapons orders. And they did so after learning from others' experiences. For example, in 2016, Myanmar signed a $560 million deal to purchase 16 JF-17 Thunder fighter jets and became the first export customer for the joint China-Pakistan aircraft. What followed turned into one of the most damaging export failures China has ever faced. By 2022, 11 of the 16 aircraft were grounded due to structural cracks in the airframe. The jet's radar suffered repeated malfunctions and poor accuracy. The Weapon Mission Management Computer failed to support beyond visual range missile operations. Engines degraded rapidly, with repeated failures across the fleet. Myanmar's military leader formally expressed strong dissatisfaction, straining relations with Pakistan. China had to intervene diplomatically. In fact, Pakistan even offered newer variants, but Myanmar rejected them outright. Later, by 2020, multiple Chinese-built frigates were abandoned by Bangladesh along its riverbanks. The ships suffered from poor hull metallurgy, radar failures, unreliable fire control systems, gun malfunctions, and spare parts shortages. Despite repeated attempts at repair, the vessels could not be made operational at acceptable standards. At sea, Pakistan, China's closest military partner, also experienced serious problems. The Pakistan Navy's Zulfikar-class frigates, built in China, developed identical engine degradation patterns across multiple ships. The fact that the failures appeared consistently across different vessels indicated a fundamental design flaw rather than an isolated maintenance issue. F-22 Zulfikar have experienced frequent engine failures. These breakdowns, often occurring mid-mission, have led to unplanned dockings, aborted operations, and the strategic loss of momentum during joint drills and maritime exercises. China's domestic military also faced internal shocks. Between 2023 and 2024, Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign uncovered severe failures inside the PLA rocket force. Investigators found multiple intercontinental ballistic missiles filled with water instead of fuel, along with malfunctioning silo lids that could not open properly. These were not isolated incidents, but systemic maintenance and oversight failures. The discovery raised serious questions about the reliability of China's nuclear deterrent and exposed how corruption and falsified inspection reports had penetrated even the most sensitive strategic forces. More than 9 senior generals were removed, including top officers from the Rocket Force, Navy, and Air Force. Leadership at major defense firms such as Norinco, Avic, and CASC were also purged. As investigations spread, production schedules slowed, contracts were frozen, and deliveries were delayed. But China has a recovery plan. China's recovery strategy is anchored in its 15th five-year plan from 2026 to 2030, which marks a clear shift from speed and quantity towards quality and reliability. The first priority is internal cleanup. After corruption scandals exposed fake inspections and substandard equipment, procurement rules are being rewritten, oversights tightened, and inspection systems restructured. The goal is to stop defective systems from passing quality checks and restore basic confidence. The second pillar is deeper military-civilian fusion. With sanctions limiting access to advanced chips and materials, China plans to rely more heavily on its civilian tech sector. Companies working in artificial intelligence, robotics, semiconductors, and material science are being pulled into weapons development. Beijing believes civilian industries move faster, test more rigorously, and maintain higher quality standards than traditional state-owned defense firms. On the export side, China is becoming more cautious. Instead of aggressively pushing new and untested platforms, it is prioritizing quality over quantity and combat-proven systems. Simpler and proven designs are now preferred over experimental weapons, reducing the risk of public failures like those seen in 2025. Pakistan will remain China's main anchor customer. Large submarines and aircraft programs provide steady revenue, real-world feedback, and a controlled environment to refine systems quietly. China is also leaning into dual-use technology exports. Civilian drones, logistics vehicles, and Coast Guard vessels are being adapted for military use, allowing China to bypass some export restrictions and maintain influence even as traditional arms sales decline. The 2027 objective is only a waypoint rather than a final destination. Beijing is simultaneously pushing to complete its military force structure by 2035 and ultimately aims to achieve unmatched capabilities by 2049. In short, China is trying to survive a credibility collapse, rebuild trust step by step, and slowly transform its arms industry from a paper tiger into a reliable supplier. Whether it succeeds will define China's military influence for the next generation.